Alrighty, you should be good to go.
Okay, welcome. I am Senator Tom Sherman from District 24. Today we will be conducting a regular meeting of the Commission to study environmentally triggered chronic illness. Before we get started, I'll read through a checklist to ensure that the meeting we are holding is in compliance with the right to know law. As chair of the Commission to study environmentally triggered chronic illness, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12 pursuant to executive order 2020-04, and its extensions, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which is authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. In accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that number one, we are providing public access to the meeting by telephone with additional access possible by video and other electronic means. We are utilizing Zoom for this electronic meeting. All members of the committee and selected legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously in this meeting through this platform. And the public has access to contemporaneously watch or listen to the meeting on Zoom or YouTube and via phone by following the directions and links provided on General Court website. We have, number two, we have provided public notice of the necessary information for accessing the meeting in the Senate calendar. Number three, we are providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there are problems with access. If anyone has a problem, please email remotesenate@leg.state.nh.us or call 603-271-6931. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting, will be adjourned and rescheduled. Number five, please note that all votes taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. And finally, number six, let's start the meeting by taking roll call attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state where they are and if anyone else is in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under the right to know law. I'll call the roll. Representative Jeff Soloway.
Present. I am in my home office in Lee, New Hampshire, and am alone.
Great. Representative Gary Woods. Okay, Gary, I don't think is here. Representative Bill Nelson.
Gary just logged on.
Okay, we'll come back to him. By the way, I'm Senator Sherman, Senator Tom Sherman. I am in my home in Rye. There are other family members present, but they are not in the room with me. Senator Jeb Bradley. Representative Charlie McMahon. Let's see, Dr. Kathleen Bush.
Yes, hi, I'm here in my office in Concord and I'm alone in the room.
Great. Let's see, did you say Representative Nelson was just logging on?
Representative Woods.
Oh, Representative Woods. Is he on?
Yes, I'm Gary Woods. I'm here in Bow in my home and my study by myself.
Great. Hi, Gary. Mike Wimsatt.
Mike, sorry, we can't hear you. You don't appear to be muted, but there we go.
It's because I didn't have my mic down. Hi, I'm Mike Wimsatt. I'm here in Concord and alone in the room, but there are others in the home.
Okay. Amy Costello.
Hi, yes, Amy Costello. I am at home in Dover and alone in the room.
Dan. Dan Cesar. Okay. Robert Timmons.
Yes, I am at my office in Exeter, and I have one coworker in the room.
Margaret DiTullio.
Yes, I'm in my place in Jackson in my office by myself.
Mindy Mesmer.
Mindy Mesmer in my office in Rye, although there are other family members in the home that are not in the room.
Great. Did I miss anybody?
Nancy
Nancy.
Murphy.
Oh, Nancy, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Good morning, everybody. I am home in Merrimack in a room by myself.
Great. Okay. We go to the agenda.
Which should be interesting.
Okay. So today we have, is it Weeders, Whiter? How do we, or maybe the best would be for Katie to go ahead and do the introductions so that I don't butcher yet
Senator?
another last name.
Senator, sorry, really quickly, we have to do the minutes first.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the minutes as done so ably by Nancy?
So moved.
A second?
Yes,
Okay, so that's Jeff Soloway on the motion to accept the minutes and Gary Woods on the second. Any discussion on the minutes?
took me 4 hours to read them.
Brevity is not my strength.
I just wanted to say thank you to the Honorable Nancy Murphy for such an amazing detailed job on the minutes.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.
Any other corrections, comments? Okay.
Do roll call.
We have to do a roll call vote on this. So we'll go through the roll again. Senator Sherman, yes. Representative Soloway,
Yes.
Representative Wood,
Yes,
Nancy Murphy,
Yes.
let me find, I'm just doing people who are present. Katie Bush,
Yes.
Mike Wimsat,
Yes.
Amy Costello,
Yes.
Robert Timmons,
Yes.
Margaret DiTullio,
Yes.
Mindy Mesmer.
Yes.
Did I miss anybody?
Sorry to interrupt, Senator. I just saw that Representative Nelson is in the attendees, so I'm going to promote him to panelist. Representative, it's going to kick you out for a second, but bring you back in. Representative, you should be in and able to speak and put your
Sure.
video on as well if you wish.
That's an I. I agree. That's an I. I'm present.
Okay. Hi, Bill. Just state where you are and whether you're alone or somebody with you.
Okay. I'm Bill Nelson and I am in Brookfield and I'm alone.
Okay, great. And we just voted on the minutes. Do you want to jump in on that? There were.
I'm a yes vote.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, now moving along. Katie, do you want to introduce our guest?
Sure, yeah, we're really excited to welcome two guest speakers today from the Department of Health and Human Services, and also thanks to Amy Costello, who through her just network of interactions at the UNH Institute for Health Policy and Practice, actually is the one who invited our speakers here today. So, but I'll just introduce them as the DHHS representative on the commission. And we're really excited to have David Wieters, who's the Bureau Chief of the Information Services Bureau within the department, and also Chawe Chawla, who is our Bureau Chief of Public Health Statistics and Informatics. And so they're here today to talk about a new enterprise business intelligence system that will be essentially a new data warehouse and data dissemination platform for the department. And so this really, I think, aligns with the goals of this commission to integrate data and make data accessible for decision making. So I believe we see them now here. They are just both promoted to panelists. So thank you both for joining us today. I think the plan is that they'll walk us through a presentation and then we'll have some time for discussion. Thank you.
All right, Katie, just to interrupt. Andrew Chalsma, I believe is supposed to present as well. Is that correct? I see him here and
Oh, okay, great. So I wasn't sure if he was here as well. So Andrew Chalsma also is joining us from the analytics department from the Medicaid program in the department.
Great. Thank you very much for the introduction, Katie. My name is David Wieters, Information Services Director. And our team, and Andrew, Jaway, and I are like the fearsome trio trying to move data analytics forward for the department. And so thank you, representatives and senators and members of the committee for having us here to speak to you today on our data analytics and enterprise business intelligence platform. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So hopefully you can see that in about a second here. All right, is everyone able to see my presentation? Great. So what we've been doing for a while is setting up the infrastructure for an enterprise business intelligence platform. We've leveraged braided funding across the department to implement this solution, and we continue to expand it on a daily basis. So what is the enterprise business intelligence platform? Well, it is essentially a scalable enterprise data analytics platform that serves as our comprehensive data repository for multiple systems. This platform allows us to do analytic trend analysis as well as some predictive analytics and really good, robust visualizations. Currently, we have some public-facing analytics that you may be aware of. We have the COVID-19 pandemic response analytics out there, as well as our wisdom data is out there and available for public health different initiatives. Our goals was to leverage this platform, which is based off of using Oracle as our database. Informatica is our tool that essentially allows us to transform or move data from multiple different data sources or systems into our database environment, and then Tableau to really present it to our individuals internally as well as public-facing citizens. The goals were to build this platform to really help us with a consolidated, more comprehensive and approach for reporting analytics and visualizations, and really drive decision-making with data. And so taking data, making it information, and really providing knowledge for our employees as well as our citizens throughout the state. Additionally, data can be very complex, so our goal was to create a user-friendly environment to enable people to understand and create useful information out of that data. So sometimes the data is really hard to see if you don't make it really useful. So that was one of our goals. And then the final one is really make it so that we can bring as many data sources together as possible. So we started integrating, and I'm not going to go through every single one of our data sources right now, and this is probably not a fully comprehensive list, but we really focused on DHHS data sources with some of our partners with the Secretary of State for Vital Records, and looking through, we're actually in conversations with other departments as well to include additional data sets. So at a very high level, more recently, we've been focused a lot on the contact tracing, patient investigation, case monitoring, and vaccine administration. But we built the platform so it could be scalable across different environments. I'll stop there for a brief moment. Is there any questions on the last two slides?
Just one quick one. The vaccine administration system, is that part of the new registry, or is that going to be incorporated into this?
So the new registry, which we are calling the New Hampshire Immunization Information System, will be incorporated into this. However, it just recently went live December 7th, sort of a soft go live, and then we're working with the hospitals to go live in tentatively April of this year. At that point, we will be ingesting that data into the EBI so we can build more robust data analytics. That follows very specific legislation. So there are data governance and management rules that go into place to make sure that the data is not shared beyond the scope of what it's allowed to do. So that requires some extra effort when it comes to some of those sensitive systems like the New Hampshire IIS.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Great. Thank you.
So continuing forward, we have what we call dashboards, several different dashboards, both internal and external. The goal of those dashboards is to present the data in a user-friendly manner so that they can, so that both employees, in many cases, employees leverage the data to make decisions on their programs and how they can further enhance the services to our citizens, or provide public-facing data dashboards, as is the case for COVID-19 data, so that our public can actually consume it and understand where the cases are presenting, where community transmission are going, and essentially with the vaccine administration as we move forward, where can you get the vaccine and how do you register? So moving on, so we have essentially a high-level database architecture here. So there's two major environments, the non-public environment and the public environment. So the non-public environment is really meant to be that internal-facing data that in many cases is not aggregate or de-identified. It's identifiable information, and it needs to be secured in such a way that only the program areas that are supporting the data or supporting the service have access, and they can leverage that data to either report to their federal or state partners or perform their services as needed. The public environment is housed in the cloud, and we just actually recently migrated to the cloud to do this, to expand our functionality. So with the COVID-19, we got a massive surge of individuals interested in the data that the state was presenting, and we needed to expand the functionality. So we moved it to the cloud to allow for that. And currently we have our COVID response dashboards up there, and we're moving our social determinants of health dashboards. And there's a couple links there that you can go and browse and see. We plan to expand that to address the opioid crisis and have some opioid crisis response dashboards as well to provide information to our citizens so that they're aware of the crisis and how we're actually managing it and some of the outcomes associated with that. Any questions on the last two slides? Okay, so.
Could I ask a question? I have a question.
Certainly.
This is interesting in the sense of, if I understand, make sure I'm understanding correctly, you're garnering the data from a variety of areas and then putting it in a form that allows decision making. The decision making is still in person, correct? I guess I'm aiming that toward, can this data be massaged in a way such that the use of neural networks can be used to gather more information in that regard, or is it always going to be, a person decision-making process?
That's a very good question, Representative Woods. I would never say never. The challenge for neural networks is usually funding and time, but right now it is currently our first steps into enterprise business intelligence was to do the automation of the data source transformation into the environment, and I'll walk through the high-level process of what we do there. So there is some automation in terms of right now, without the enterprise business intelligence platform, people are going into the system, exporting it into Excel files, and then trying to crosswalk it between multiple different Excel files, which lends itself to lots of opportunities for errors. And so what we're trying to do is automate those business processes in the enterprise business intelligence so that they have a model from which they can start and they don't necessarily have to copy and paste data from different places. However, the next step is obviously is the machine learning or the neural network type processing, where you take it and you based off of trend analysis and understanding and predictive analytics, you take that to the next level of really saying, now that we know how our data works, we build algorithms to represent that and do it for us. That would be a logical next step. However, our first step is to get all of our data and relate it first into our environment. And so that we really understand how to model it, how it relates. A lot of times when you bring up, how does child welfare information relate to COVID-19? There is a relationship, but you need to try to figure out, okay, how does that relate? And then really build that knowledge, that institutional knowledge, and build it into the system. Hopefully that sort of answers your question, Representative Woods. Probably not.
Yeah, it does. I'm just excited for that next step because the wealth of applicable information is in that next step. It's once you can get past having to do it in person and can get some quotes help along the way with neural nets and machine learning, the outcome is really sort of mind-boggling. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. I just wanted to point out, when you were talking about the merging of multiple Excel spreadsheets, I saw Representative Soloway have pain, and we have treatment for that, Representative Soloway. So is this, one of the things that Katie and I worked with a long time ago on the old environmental triggered, we were on a subgroup looking at merging all the different databases. This is really exciting. But if say, for example, this commission had a query, and if you're going to get to this, just let me know and I'll hold the question. But is it possible for a commission such as ours to come and ask you a question, and you can feed that into your database and pull from multiple sources in one query? Or how does that work for either a member of the legislature, a statutory committee, or someone to ask a question of this system?
Thank you, Senator Sherman. That's a great question. I'm hoping that maybe Andrew or Jawei might be able to address that. I think right now, the initial answer is that, again, we're sort of in our infancy stages of bringing all the data sources together. Building a type of question response or that what if scenario is also part of like that machine learning next step type process of being able to put that in. But Andrew, Joswa or Jawei, do you have added information to that?
Yeah, just add that, yeah, we're kind of in infancy is a good way to put it. And, the department has always prided itself on getting information out when it's requested. So, whether it's in data that's in this system or data that's in other systems or is harder or easy to get to, we're always open for information requests in any part of the department.
Right.
So and I think, in the longer term, what this system does is makes it a lot easier to serve up information. And, as, policy needs change and evolve, that's where you'd want to develop more public dashboards to meet a particular need. And we have the tools now and the kind of capacity to, assuming there's a person there or funding there to make something happen, to even surface emerging issues, like we've been doing with COVID. So it's coming in terms of making things easier, but we would respond regardless of whether something were available in the system or not.
Thanks.
The way I look at those questions, they actually help us frame what we should be working on next. So I always take those questions as really helpful to understand what's important to the hearts and minds of our legislature as well as our citizens, and trying to figure out how we can automate or build those solutions to quickly respond to those requests. But I agree, I second Andrew's statement that even if the system wasn't able to answer it, we would still find a way in which to try to get that information out of the other systems.
Yeah, I would like to add this, John. I would like to add some on top of David and Andrew comment is we have the public data portal, and most of the indicators meet our DHHS or DPHS programs business needs. But we do work with the public to identify the needs from the public on the data visualization, and then take it back to work with our internal programs to generate or produce some data visualization as many as possible and present it on our data portal so that it will be easy for the public to look at what the programs internally are working on, and then to have a better communication on the data statistic side and address the current issue to the public as well. So that's another way that we take the data request or some interest from the public and working with the internal programs to identify what we can present without breaking the privacy rule to the public.
So in the interest of time, if there aren't any more questions on these last two slides, I'll just continue through and try to get towards the end and then ask for questions. Again, if there's any additional, just let me know. So a lot of times people ask what the process is and why it takes so long to get data in. So just at a very high level, a lot of times we need to identify what does done look like. What is the goal? What are we trying to present? And that's usually where the crux is of where we're going. And we get that goal from questions like you brought up, Senator Sherman. And Representative Salloway, did you have a question?
No, I'm following your slide. Please
Oh,
go
okay,
ahead.
just making sure. Sorry, I apologize. So as we go through this, we identify the goal, which part of that is identifying the data source that we're looking at. When we, in some data sources, so like in the opioid crisis response, some data sources that would help us provide a better response are in the prescription drug monitoring program or in the trauma emergency management information system. Those are housed in other departments, and there's legislation surrounding those that make it sometimes make it more difficult to share beyond those departmental boundaries. And so what we have to look at that as part of that identification of goal to see if there is legislation surrounding the data sources, and if there is, how can we leverage those data sources effectively? And if we can't, then we introduce legislation to try to address those. And then the final part, as I indicated, was what does done look like? And it sounds like that should be really easy, but sometimes done changes on a daily basis. Sometimes it changes on a weekly basis. So we try to define that at least at a very high level at the beginning. And then as we go through an ingestion process where we pull the data from the data source. And that usually requires contract amendments with the different vendor systems that we're working with to indicate to them, oh, we'd like to take an export of your data and bring it into our enterprise business intelligence platform. What we have recently done is we've added into our standard terms and conditions for future contracts that would be part of all future contracts, so that they would be able to extract into our EBI. So we would not need to do that for future contracts going forward. Once it's extracted out of the original data source and into the landing zone of our enterprise business intelligence platform, we then go through modeling of the data. And this requires a team of data analysts and system administrators and database people, and really a lot of people smarter than me, mostly in Jawei and Andrew's group. And I have a couple people on my team that work on it, along with our contracted vendors. And then after that, it's really going to the publishing of the dashboard. So that the two biggest, I would say that the longest time consuming components are the first and the third. So identifying the goal, going through legislation and making sure that we can use the data properly and how we're going to use the data is a really key component to make sure that we're not only adhering to state and federal laws, but also securing the privacy of our citizens' data and using it to the way it was intended. And then the modeling of the data is where we really figure out how does it relate to our enterprise data sources and what will be important for us to display in a visualization. Any additional items, Andrew or Jawei, that I missed on this process? No. So in terms of our future state and next steps, our goal as a department is to continue to provide this centralized platform consisting of all the DHHS and any other state data sources. So we're working in conjunction with the Department of Information Technology, and we're hoping that this expands to a statewide initiative where we have a statewide enterprise business intelligence platform. And this will help drive those data-driven decisions to be made based off of the information analysis and trends. From a programmatic perspective, we want to provide that platform that can really enhance the programs and services that each one of our programs are doing and provide that service-specific analysis. And so there's definitely differences from the enterprise or the department perspective down to a programmatic level. For instance, COVID-19 is really sort of an enterprise statewide initiative where we're working across our data sources to provide this information to our citizens directly. Programmatic would be like the, I'm sorry, Jawei, can you bring up a couple like the asthma relationship, the lead poisoning data sets and other data sets that we have very specific to programs and how they're impacting. But the idea would be to see how those data sets sort of overlay on top of each other geographically, and do we see any trends where there's a population of people that are more prone to asthma that are also more prone to some other environmentally triggered illness. So it's trying to take that and use the platform to do those type of functions. So then our current efforts, as we've sort of spoken about already, is really predominantly we've been focused a lot of effort on COVID-19 visualizations. We do have some opioid crisis response visualizations that we're hoping to publish here in the next coming months. And those both have been funded primarily by Center for Disease Control and Prevention funds to move us forward, in CARES Act funds for the COVID-19 response. And then Jawei's team has been working very diligently on a Wisdom 2.0 rollout, and she can talk to that briefly here if you want, Jawei.
Yeah, so currently the Wisdom environment that we publish on the external side doesn't really meet our needs. So we are doing the enhancement on the Wisdom platform and also the application to bring it to the next level. We call the Wisdom 2.0, which will engage more data set and also do more visualization as well. One part that David has mentioned it about, I think it's we do have the interest on data linkage to look at the environmental risk along with the health outcomes. We try not to do the mapping together or to overlap the maps together so that you will to avoid the misleading on the data result. But for Wisdom 2.0, we will have more in topic areas as well as more indicators that we're going to present to the public, and also to enhance the performance on the data visualization side in terms of utilizing Tableau data visualization software tool, and also to provide more interactive visualization on the Wisdom 2.0. So all the Wisdom 2.0 soon will be part of the DHHS public data web portal. And then in that way, we will have a more data source that will be engaged for the public to be able to not really to do the query, but to present on multiple health areas.
Thank you, Jawei.
Yep.
And then the final one here on the current efforts is, and it's ongoing, always happens, and Andrew can talk to some of this, is the Medicaid and long-term supports and services visualizations, which is where our enterprise business intelligence platform started, and continues to grow from there. Andrew, did you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I think it's really important to kind of summarize a lot of this, that, you know, the department had not gone through this phase of rethinking about its data warehousing and data analytics and public dashboards, internal dashboards. It hadn't thought about that in several years. So everything had been, you know, when we first started working on this, you know, we were kind of at a point where some of the technology had become old. And so a big part of this is really bringing in new state-of-the-art technology that is still, you know, fits with working with the state IT department. So we're actually using tools that aren't kind of, they're fairly expensive tools. They're business kind of standard tools. You know, it's not like we're using open source software that you might use as like a grad student or something like that. We're using really kind of standard products that have a lot of support behind them and a lot of long-term benefit. So, you know, we started with Medicaid long-term services and supports because there was an enormous volume of data there that we needed to really get our hands on. And so that was the kind of genesis for the project, was using Medicaid funds to do the kind of the first big kind of slug of developing purchasing hardware, purchasing software. So we have a very robust system thanks to Medicaid, and that was possible because it was funded with 90% federal funds. So we sort of took care of that first step there. And what it means is that, you know, now Medicaid and also commercial insurance data that we have is all part of the picture whenever we think of a new project. It's not just, oh, this is a public health concern, so we're going to like focus on the data sets public health uses because it's too hard to get at the Medicaid side. Now, you know, a big part of this project is making it easy for the right person in the department or working with stakeholders outside to get at the information they need. So having it grow is really important to keep with that vision of, you know, tying together data where we can, and but also having it just simply very accessible in a really high performance environment.
Thank you. So then the last things here is, what are our ideas for next steps? And essentially anytime that we're looking at different commissions or different groups that are looking for, how do we get those data sources and how do we address your needs? What we usually look for is 3 different areas. First, a prioritization of what you're looking for, the data and the dashboards that you're looking for. And then the next one is really, is there any legislations that impacts the usage of the data that you're prioritizing? And then finally, unfortunately, nothing's free. We're not staffed to be able to address all of the prioritized needs across the department. So what we look for is additional funds to offset the professional services that we contract out for to be able to implement these solutions. So with that, that was the last slide. I'll leave it to the floor for questions if there's any.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's really, you're talking to a whole bunch of, and I'll at least speak for myself, a bunch of nerds and data wonks here. Sorry if I offended anybody, but I think of that as a compliment. So this is a commission that really has worked since our first iteration several years ago, trying to see a more robust data system that brought all the different systems together within the department, but also I guess my first question would be, does this have the capacity to reach across into other departments? We have, through legislation, there was an MOU developed between DES and DHHS, and that came out of this commission. And Katie has been very involved in that, as has Mike Wimsatt, I believe. And the question is whether this is something that will enhance that kind of MOU, that cross-department understanding.
Thank you for that question, Senator Sherman. Certainly. So currently, Department of Insurance is leveraging this platform, as well as GOFR, the Governor's Office for Economic Relief and Recovery. And we just entered into an agreement with Department of Education where we're leveraging a preschool development grant to address education's data along with DHHS's data and combining it together. So we're moving forward on that right now.
So if I were just going to put out a, can you imagine, or, you know, suppose you took all those different departments, you know, we've talked about bringing in some of the data that Amy Costello works with, the Department of Insurance, Department of Corrections is another very interesting department for data resource, but creating a statewide data repository where, for example, you could do a query that talks about well water containing lead, looking across at Medicaid and saying, what about the socioeconomic factors that might, you take the DES map of wells, that private wells that have high lead levels, and you correlate that with what might be happening on an educational level, socioeconomic level, corrections level, and looking for all these different, and Jeff Soloway is going to bonk me over the head if I get too much into all of these different things together. But looking for these relationships that might be occurring and being able to validate policy that would then be reaching out to address the concerns with the understanding that this data has provided us with a real strong argument for an intervention. Is that something that you can envision this being able to do in the future?
That embodies the vision of what we hope that this system would grow to. And so certainly we started it off as a DHHS solution and built the infrastructure in such a way in conjunction with DOIT so that it could be expanded. It could be multi-tenant in the sense that it could allow for all of the departments to build off of it and into it. And also, but that does two things. One is it allows them to use it for their internal data reports and visualizations, but also allows us to then build those relationships and look at it as a state level as opposed to a department level. So it's taking it to the next step. I would say it's out of scope for myself and our team specifically because we represent DHHS, but my background is running an IT shop for a county of 52 departments. And so that's how we developed it. And so we've been building with this as an enterprise architecture for the state. And with Commissioner Goulet's assistance and his team's assistance, we've been starting to spread the news to other departments so that we can start getting them on board. And DOIT is a large component of running this system so that we have that ability to say it's not just a DHHS platform, it's a state of New Hampshire platform.
So you make me think of about 1,000 questions, and I don't want to hog the floor here, but I did have one follow-up, and that was just a concern. And is it Dr. Chawla or I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with the name. Sorry, but you had mentioned something about being cautious about maps. One of the interesting things that we've thought about and talked about since our inception is the idea of being able to build at least a conceptual map with all of the data that we have, where we look at environmental impacts, say arsenic, lead, other things that we know are in the groundwater, well water, or otherwise, and DES already has these maps. And then being able to take some of the wisdom type data and We actually went through an exercise 3 or 4 years ago where we just listed diseases down a column, and be able to overlay these. And maybe I misinterpreted during the presentation whether there is, we understand that we have to be careful about causation and correlation, right, Jeff? But are you cautioning us against being able to take these different levels of data, which are, in my simple mind, are maps, and being able to overlay them and being able to look for, wow, we've got this area where we've got a bunch of wells in one area with high arsenic levels, and look, we're also seeing this disease outcome clustered around that. Are you cautioning us against being able to use this platform for that, or is this a platform that actually is pretty well designed for that kind of bridging between two departments' databases?
Well, it's not really against that type of comparison or doing some linkage or even the mapping. Is to take it into some cautious that if we would like to present this type of data to the public, we try not to mislead the public. For example, for bladder cancer, there are many environmental risks or even the family history that will cause may result that a person have the bladder cancer. For example, it's not just simply arsenic level or some specific environment level. If we are going to do this type of mapping, put the two maps together, then we will need to be very careful on this type of utilization if we're going to push this to the public data. For the internal one, we might be able to present that over to put the maps side by side. So that would be a suggestion.
Representative Soloway, I see you moaning. So can you jump in?
I want to follow up on your questions, but David and Andrew and Ms. Chola, I want to move from structure to process and find out what the next administrative issues are for us. So you are constructing a database that's ultimately going to interact with Wisdom 2. It's going to be a database for conducting inquiry. Okay, I suspect we're all agreed on that. And your job is to develop that. The use of that database will then be, as I understand it, for internal DHHS decision-making, obviously. My understanding is that you are prepared to work on a contract basis with organizations that want to make inquiries of that database and need access to it. So you're able to contract with them, and they may be federal, they may be not-for-profits, they could be for-profits, but that's on basically a contract basis. The third issue for me, so again, internal use of DHHS, contract basis. Now we have the legislature, and let us say the legislature wishes to make a very complex series of inquiries into, for example, environmental risk and health outcomes, or insurance coverage and health outcomes, whatever. Do you have the staff to answer those inquiries without an exchange of funds? Are you adequately staffed to do that?
So the answer on that, I mean, I would say is almost most certainly no, we're not. So that's a very good question, Representative Soloway. We have a minimal staff that can maintain what we currently do. Now we do have a staff that can get the answer, and we will dedicate the staff, like Andrew indicated, that will go after the data as best as we can. However, in terms of having like other states would have a chief data officer and a whole, potentially in some states, a whole department dedicated to this type of function. We do not have that here in this state. And so my team I have a team of 2 people working on this. Andrew has a team of people working on it, primarily engulfed in Medicaid and sometimes long-term supports and services. And then Jawei has a team working on public health data. And we do have different teams working very specifically at the program and division level. But from a holistic perspective of those complex inquiries that really combines data across departments, there is not a team focused on that right now. So what we would do to really address those type of questions is we would seek grant funds or other state funds to contract out with vendors that have those resources that can really help us build those models and really address those complex questions more effectively.
So would you subcontract that kind of work out rather than creating positions within? So let's say,
Representative, are you asking my opinion or like my recommendation?
Let's say, for example, that this commission comes to you and says, we've got to have data on a very specific problem. You have a huge database. You turn to us and you say, Representative, we've got a whole line of inquiries out there from within DHHS, from people who have contracted with us with our limited resources, and you now want us to answer these very complex questions. And by the way, Representative Salloway, if you can come up with the funds, we can subcontract that work to somebody at Dartmouth Institute, somebody at the University of New Hampshire, Department of Health and Health Management and Policy, wonderful department, I recommend it. So if you provide us the resources, we can then subcontract. That enables us to stay agile, to stay lean, and get the work done. Is that something we can do?
Absolutely, and that's actually how we operate today. So for the most part, our teams are set up to maintain and operate the existing system and pull what's already there and modeled. And then when we get these complex questions, we do look for funds first to subcontract that out. We have currently we have a data analytics contract that went out to bid and was awarded to Deloitte that does a lot of the work with us. And we also leverage some other vendors as well to help us with dashboards, but they're the primary ones that won that award to work with us on that work. That's the quickest. So it comes down to time to delivery, but at the same time, building an internal team that can help guide that is also a very effective way in which to say, okay, they might not necessarily be the ones developing the solution, but they're helping to guide the strategy from a state perspective. Having those resources as state employees may be a benefit in the future. And so we'd be looking to that as an option, as a small team to help guide the state from a interdepartmental perspective, and then from a subcontracted perspective to address those complex data modeling and visualization efforts. It also helps us to, like you said, stay agile and lean and not necessarily have to have a data scientist 100% of the time. Only have a data scientist when you actually have the need, and because they're rather expensive and difficult to hire for full-time, but they are pretty easy to source through companies like our current vendor, Deloitte.
Thanks very much, David.
Certainly, thank you. I see Mindy has a question. I'm not
sure.
Senator
Go ahead,
Sherman.
Mindy.
Thank you. This is a great presentation. Thanks for doing this. I have a couple of questions. We've been talking in our commission about educational impacts, and I heard you say something about preschool. Was wondering if you're also looking, and I didn't catch it on your slide that says what data sources you're using, but we are concerned about special needs spending by district, depending on, and combining that with environmental data, especially where we know things like, unleaded gasoline and arsenic and all these things had previously been looked at in terms of, educational impacts on children. Wondering if that is one of the data sources you're able to key into. And then my second question is, I realize the sensitivities around public presentation of this data, but are you maintaining the ability to, at what level are you maintaining the ability to look at this data? Is it down to zip code level or lower, or, you know, realizing that it would have to be aggregated to for public presentation, but just wondering if you're preserving that ability to do that.
So often internally, we are able to go down to the street zip code level, but publicly we have to aggregate it, and we have strict rules on how we do that, and it's usually a county level. Sometimes we go to the town. It really depends on the data itself and whether or not you can constructively identify who that person is from the data that we're presenting. And so we go through an effort to analyze the data dashboards that are presented publicly before they go, to ensure that you can't do that constructive identification of the person.
Can I jump in with a question?
If I could speak for 2 seconds, Jeff, I have to step away for 5 minutes. Representative Soloway, would you mind chairing until I get back?
I will try to, but I must say I do not have your competence. No, I don't.
I don't believe that. I'll be right back. Thank you.
Okay. David, if I can jump in with a data question. You say you can go down to the zip code level. Can you go down to the census tract level?
So that would be a question for Andrew or Jaway.
Okay.
Representative Soloway, I'm not sure. They could probably address it. It might be based off a data source as well. Andrew, Jaway.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is particular to the data source. Some are geocoded and allow that, and some aren't. I think, you know, wherever it's necessary and, you know, we have street address, that can happen. It's not as much as a challenge as it used to be to do that kind of work, but it is, you know, only stored in certain data sets, or only certain data sets have had that process applied to it. It's not a routine thing, but, you know, obviously for environmental health related, it's really important to be
much more useful.
Yeah.
The zip code data is not useful.
Right. Yep.
The census tract is.
How about the special needs question?
Yep, I was going to get back to that. Thank you. Sorry, Mindy. So the special needs question regarding the preschool development grant, what we're right now in the infancy of that grant, identifying data sources. So I'm actually going to put that on the list to make sure that the team is doing that. I'm not on the team itself, so I will bring it to that team and address that. It's really focused on that early childhood development and the impacts of what we can or what we are or are not doing in preschool development that we could address earlier, so that we can have future improved outcomes. So that would be a key component of special needs spending as well.
Thank you.
And I think with education, there's always, you add that extra layer of challenge around data privacy, because there's federal law about sharing educational records, of course. So it's like we have to have HIPAA here and FERPA here, and, you know, the privacy of maybe environmental data in some cases. So those are big challenges. But you know, it's sort of one thing we encounter through all of this work, David, Chaway, and I, is always this problem of like, we could do something if only, you know, it were feasible. And sometimes things do get more feasible over time. You know, if you can identify the why data sharing is important, and what can be done with it. And I think, like, just to emphasize what David was saying earlier, you know, having the platform and kind of the policies and procedures now in the state is a huge advancement, you know, that DOIT is on board with this concept. We've already done some initial like pilots around COVID with Department of Ed, because there's some kind of shared data there, and, you know, things are working now on a technical level, which is really, you know, a big win for everybody to have that. And it's just now more about, you know, what are those projects where, you know, how do you create these shared data projects and make people feel comfortable, you know, about both sides kind of seeing the data. I mean, we all work for the state of New Hampshire, so it should be possible for any important policy issue. You should be able to get there.
That's kind of why I brought up spending as an indicator of the level of
Yep.
need
Yeah.
in a community.
Yep.
And
Yes.
that should be non.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, and it's going to be interesting. That particular preschool development has as its vision, grabbing and looking in as broadly as they can at all sorts of different data sources. So they may be a good, pilot for kind of getting involving education and health data together.
Further questions?
So, Kate, this is maybe a question for Dr. Bush and Scott Wimsatt, although I don't see him on anymore. Katie, do you see anything in the horizon as far as funding through EPHT or other resources for building out a module or a section within EBI related to environmental data?
Yeah, I think that, thanks, Amy. It was hard to see you in your halo there. I think that speaks to David's point earlier of sort of identifying shared priorities, right? So our federal funders have priorities. We as a program have a priority within the larger division, priority within the larger department priority. And then, how does that marry or couple with DES's priorities? And so I think, yes, there's opportunity, and it's just sort of concretely identifying what those priority areas are. And I think everyone's familiar with our team here. We fund, 5 positions here at the state. And if we came to agreement within the division, within the department, sort of what to put our energy and resources towards, there's certainly opportunity. I mean, things that we've been talking with Jawei about as we envision Wisdom 2.0 already is a private well water dashboard where we would work with DES to aggregate that data. Another example, leveraging funds from governor allocation in the Groundwater Source Water Protection Fund is radiation monitoring data from the Public Health Laboratory and developing a radiation monitoring dashboard to make that data publicly available. Other examples that are ongoing around the biomonitoring program. And that's a great example of shared data with well data and then human specimen data. So these are all certainly ideas and things that we're actively working on in the tracking program. So I think it really is about marrying, legislative priorities, community priorities, and then agency level priorities. And to David's earlier point, like marrying that with real funding to support it. So I hope that answers your question. So yes, some things are in the pipeline, but I think some of the larger, really big, complex questions of the commission, I think that's going to take a huge, that's a bigger investment of resources than sort of project by project, where we each have a truly, like to Representative Wood's points, a truly automated query system. That's really not what we're talking about right now. What we're still talking about is very people powered and takes people to model the data and visualize the data and make that accessible.
What are you looking at for a rollout of Wisdom 2?
I think that's for Jawei.
Jawei?
I'm sorry, what's the question? Sorry, excuse me.
What do you envision for a rollout date for Wisdom 2? That's a big event.
Yeah, so for Wisdom 2, like what I said, this will be rolled out into the department-wise public data portal. So we will enhance. For the first part is the technology performance. So right now, our Wisdom dashboard performance is not really good to meet the need to have multiple users to be able to access one dashboard at the same time. So that's the part that we are leveraging what the department currently has on the Tableau dashboard software tools. So that's a technology performance enhancement. The second part is to enhance the content that we're going to present. So currently, whatever the content indicators or data visualization in the current Wisdom, we call it 1.0, would all be migrated into Wisdom 2.0. And more than that, we are also looking into like Medicaid data and to have more environmental data from DES if it's available, we're able to get to be able to present on this public dashboard.
Wow.
So that's a big work. And other than that, like what we have discussed or Dave has mentioned on other available data sources that if we are able to present on in a public dashboard format without breaking any privacy rule or without leaking any information concerned, then that's what we will be working on as well. So I don't know if that answered your question. Yes.
A long time. This is going to take.
When Joey, when do we think we'll have the first kind of rollout, at least of the new?
In terms of the timeline?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we are working with Dave's team and also DOIT. Dave mentioned that we have a new cloud environment in place. So that the application side will be migrated from currently we're using Amazon Cloud, then we will migrate to the department cloud environment. And the timeline for that, I expect it will be done by late summer or spring, not spring, excuse me, fall this year. So that's the goal that we are working on, and that's the timeline that we have to keep because we do have some licensing a due date that we need to meet. So the timeline wise is by fall this year to have the Wisdom 2.0 in place.
And I assume you have some interoperability challenges to solve as you try to do this.
We have all kind of challenges, not only interoperational challenges. As you can imagine, we're like staffing, we're short of staffing to be able to do this type of work, and that's the major challenge. And so we will try our best to work with other teams to have the Wisdom 2.0 rolled out in fall this year. So that's the work that we are pushing moving forward. To be honest, it's a little bit difficult under the circumstances, especially during the pandemic. Everybody is working on COVID things. So, but we will try our best to roll it out, and that's the goal that we have to meet.
Thank you. Other inquiries, other questions? And we've seen our chairman is back.
But he may still be on the phone.
Woods has a question as well, and possibly former Representative Messner.
Yeah, this is very granular, and I apologize, but one of your slides, you talked about transforming the data as one of the steps. And one of the difficulties we have is making sure that data integrity is maintained. And I'm not sure what that term meant to you when you transform data. It just raised a little bit of concern about data integrity.
Certainly, and Andrew or Jawei, you tell me where I missed this, but the goal of the transformation is to say in one data source, and I'll just put it as a very generic example. In one data source, it says David Wieters lives at 123 Elm Street. In another data source, it says David Wieters lives at 123 Elm ST period. And then another one just says 123 Elm. The transformation takes that and basically automates it and does some other checks and says what other items associated with David tells me that all three of those records are the same. And it does that transformation and says, I'm going to store it in our data warehouse as 123 Elm STREET, even though it came from three different places in three different ways, but I know for 100% fact that this is all David Wieters, and he lives specifically at 123 Elm Street. I don't live at 123 Elm Street, by the way, but that is the example. Other transformations. So from a data integrity, it's maintaining data integrity because it's based off of rules that we know that we are matching the data properly, but it is changing it so that when we're presenting it, we're not duplicating the data. Because otherwise it would show 3 records or 3 entries for that one person. That's one version of the transformation. There's a lot of different kinds of transformations, but to be very specific, Representative Woods, we would not change the data from what its original intent was.
It's a clarifying process, and if anything, maintaining integrity rather than losing integrity.
Correct. Thank you.
I just had a quick question. It seems like you get your direction and funding through DHHS because you're part of DHHS, or how does that work? Or are you separate from somehow?
No, that is correct. I work for DHHS, so I'm the information services team. So all the different technology systems, I'm matrix responsibility for, and I'm like a liaison between us and DOIT. And so all of our funding, all of our solutions are really DHHS directed. However, there was nothing in the grants or the funding that said that we couldn't implement an infrastructure that could be leveraged, which would have to be cost allocated, but could be leveraged by other departments. And so that's what we did is we implemented a scalable architecture so that other departments could play in the same sandbox, for pardon the term, but they would have to invest in it. So like we can't use federal funds from DHHS federal dollars to support Department of Safety, but Department of Safety could leverage our platform for their needs, but we could use federal funds to implement a combined opioid crisis response plan where we're actively working with them to see how we could leverage their trauma emergency management information system and combine it in, at which point they could benefit from the dashboards as well, leveraging those funds. So we're trying to braid it and make it so that we're following within our federal guidelines on how we use the funds, but also help benefit the state as a whole. And in the case of like Department of Insurance, they invested their own budget dollars to enhance and leverage the platform, but they didn't have to start from scratch. They were able to buy a portion as opposed to buy the entire infrastructure. They can add on to it.
So DES, for example, would have to buy into it as well?
Yes, essentially, in order, what we could do though is like, again, it goes to braiding of funds. So if there's a combined priority where Katie is working on something from EPHT and we have funds from DHHS that could fund the project, but it happens to also benefit DES, that is a way in which we're able to incorporate other departments. But if DES wanted to go on their own and do something specifically without leveraging our data sources or that was not in combination, then of course they would need to leverage their own funds at that point. If that hopefully answers your question.
So if I could jump back in, I apologize for my hiatus there. So does that mean that it's the question that needs to be answered that can drive whether or not you are able to keep this under your original funding source? For example, what I'm thinking of is we're doing a lot of work. I also chair the SHASHIP Advisory Council, which is Lisa Morris, and doing that work, talking about the informatics, talk about complex incorporation of information it's bridges many different sources. At the public health level, would that be an umbrella that would be also included within your grant?
So specifically, Senator Sherman, we have several different grants, but yes, public health is within DHHS, so it certainly would be included. And you'll find that I'm very similar in the sense that the reason why it was a great place to start with DHHS is we do impact and have data sources that are related to many other departments within the state. And so we are intertwined, and we can leverage funds to continue those efforts and enhance them. And when I was trying to answer the initial question was, excuse me, is that if like one or the other departments have a very specific need that's not related to DHHS,
Yep.
that's when they would need to, like if they wanted to have, this is getting into the weeds, but Tableau desktop where they could do their own type of data analytics off of the system, they would have to buy those licenses themselves. If they wanted to do DES specific dashboards just for their programs and services, and it wasn't in conjunction with the DHHS program or initiative, we would not be able to legally bind the DHHS funds to that, so that then they would have to pay for the professional services to implement those.
But something like what we were talking about earlier, which is that MOU that came out of this, where you'd be querying, trying to marry the databases of DES and DHHS to look at bladder cancer and arsenic or neurologic issues or behavioral issues in kids and lead levels. All of that would still fit within the rubric of the original intent, it sounds like, of what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
That's helpful.
Yeah. And the nice thing is that you can paint with a pretty broad brush, and our federal partners are fairly malleable as long as we can show how it benefits DHHS's programs and services, which for the most part, from every question I heard today, they fit in with what we're looking to do as well. So
I'll add something, David, that, as more and more data comes into the system, it gets leveraged for all sorts of different purposes within the department. And, it's being used right now for things that have nothing to do with the funding, the initial funding. It's sort of like we bought this great machine and filled it with good stuff, and now we can use it to churn out all sorts of things. It's assuming there's a person there to do the analysis or do the querying or what have you.
Well, I'm looking at everybody's face on Zoom right now, and I can see everybody is thinking about this. So this is really, really exciting. And are there other questions?
I guess I'll ask one more question if you don't mind.
Sure.
So you mentioned DOIT. Where do they fit in the scheme of things then? Where are they housed in terms of the funding and how you said something about they're complicit with some of this stuff. So I don't know do you have to check in with them on some things, or like where do they get their funding from, and where in the umbrella over you guys do they sit?
So right now, since the majority of the work is DHHS driven, they're sitting in our Class 27 line item budget to support the resources that actually are focused on the services. When they work for another department, they attribute their time in using job numbers in our financial system to those departments, equivalent Class 27 line items. So they're general fund, but they also have, for DHHS, they're cost allocated across multiple programs. And so we do have a dedicated team. Their function has been to really maintain the jobs, the back end, maintain the production and the promotion into production. And they're part of each and every Agile team that's working forward to deliver systems so that we don't have any bumps in the road in getting to a final publication. We have, I think about 4 dedicated staff that are working from DOIT. Is that correct, Andrew, Joey? They're working on that. Our goal, in I would say not next biennium, but the following biennium, would be to move that team into more of a shared service, sort of like email and file services types services are for the state, at which point they would have a governance process on how the resources get allocated and which projects move forward. But at that time, and like Andrew indicated, the way the system is set up is once we've pulled the data source into the EBI and it's been modeled and it's available for use, if you have a team like Andrew and Jawei and Katie they have teams of people. We give them access to the data so they can go and build their own dashboards. And then there's a process to promote them from a development into production. And it's a pretty well-oiled process to do that. So the additional resources are when you're pulling in new data sources, working on legislation to allow us to use the data source, doing some of the, and then doing the initial visualization. So there's 3 different areas that really need that. It's that new data source. Once the data source is pulled in, you can play with the data, build your own dashboards. There's no additional cost to house it at that point. It's now, if you have the resources in the teams, like Katie and maybe DES has them as well, if they can develop them themselves, they don't need professional services. But as Senator Sherman asked earlier, and I think other representatives on the call, the more complex it gets, the more likely we would be looking to subcontract out the services. And it really comes down to how big and complex the project is will determine whether or not you have to go out to subcontract or you can maintain internally. Hopefully I answered your question, Mindy.
Yeah, so I have one more follow-up question. I'm sorry. How about the corrections data? Is there an effort underway to pull them in at all, or is that, I know there's some issues with platform communication.
Mindy, sorry, just before you answer that, I just wanted to say thank you I have to hop off. And so I just want to say thank you, David and Choe and Andrew. This has been invaluable. I know that we all will have maybe more conversations in the future about how this can be used. So thank you very much for your time. I have to go.
Thank you, Amy.
Department of Corrections. Yes, Mindy, please. Thanks.
Jeff Salloway has to go too. I apologize.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's nice to meet you.
My pleasure.
So I don't know of any direct efforts to bringing in Department of Corrections data. It is something that it's in our backlog. I know it's on my backlog of items to address and try to bring in. However, a lot of things got put to the bottom burner, at least on my plate, when COVID came in. And so I would say that it is an interest, but there isn't, that I know of, any funding or efforts moving right now.
So there's no information about COVID and the corrections system?
Oh, there is.
That you guys are using?
Not yet. No, not in the enterprise platform yet. But it is a good point to try to pull that data source in.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, Mindy, I just missed that last comment. Was that about corrections? Is that what you said?
Yes.
So, David, I think it was 2016, I put a bill in with the work of Tyler and John Williams, and we used the old money coming from CON to build a platform across corrections, insurance, and DHHS to create a database of, basically it would have all the health information for the state, because those are the 3 those are the 3 departments that deal with health and health insurance. And it died in the Senate back then. It made it through, but somebody tried to attach a poison amendment to it and it was poison. What I'm wondering is, it sounds like this would have the capacity to actually do that without, just with an MOU with the Department of Corrections. Is that correct, or would it take additional legislation to create that level of database?
And I honestly don't know, but I will follow up on that. And that's the key component of that first step of identifying the goal. So I have to look at the legislation that's governing that. So I would guess that if we needed legislation to do it before, we might need legislation to do it now. But
well, it was mainly a funding issue before, because they didn't have any bridge software or any bridge database. So John Williams and Tyler would be a good person, but I'd be happy to talk to you more about that. But the idea was to have to bring all of these data points together on health in the state, because without any one of those three, you're really getting an incomplete picture of state-based healthcare.
That's definitely, that's a very good point. And so just to, if I can go back to Mindy's comment about Department of Corrections data associated in COVID. Of course, we do have the COVID cases that were in Department of Corrections in our COVID data. However, we don't have them as identified as Department of Corrections originations. So that all the cases are in our COVID data. We just have not identified them and said, and down to where that it's coming out of DOC. But that is a good point. It's again one of those. We do need to get Department of Corrections. We need to get Department of Insurance. We have a lot of different gaps in terms of how we address our data sources. And Andrew spoke it earlier, was legislation is probably one of the areas that if we didn't have legislation to deal with, we could do it quicker. But it is important in this state, in all states, to maintain the privacy of our citizens' data. And I understand the need for the legislation. And it's just working through and understanding the intent and then making sure that we adhere to that and then provide better services and programs as a result of bringing the data together. But we will, my hope was to get DOI on, which Department of Insurance is starting to engage in the platform. And now that they're engaging in the platform, then we can start building those bridges of our data sets together. And then also moving into Department of Corrections is a really good point to bring up, that if we bring them in as well, we'll have a more holistic approach to health data.
And I'll just add on that it still is on our roadmap for related to the opioid crisis and, behavioral health generally. And Commissioner Hanks has been a big, she's interested in sharing data with the health department. And I think it is a matter, nailing those legal issues is one side, and then just the funding for integration of the data. Sometimes it's easy to bring data in. Sometimes it's not, depending on how people have things set up. We are doing a little bit of pilot work we can do with Medicaid to at least know if someone is incarcerated, to kind of look at profiles of people who've been incarcerated. But their particular health system data, that's sort of a real unknown for me too. But I think it is a good point to follow up on, is like thinking, David, of them being really a key future partner. They need help with their data systems too, just like we all do.
Yeah, I sit on the Governor's Council for Corrections and Mental Health, and this has come up multiple times, but I didn't know that you were this far along. So this is incredibly exciting. I'm thrilled to have been able to hear this. Thank you. Any other questions? Bill, you have a question?
Yes, mentioned corrections not being able to give the information out on the COVID situation. But I hear on the television, they'll say certain counties' prison just had 57 people have COVID. So I've heard people put that out. Where do they get that information from?
That's county, which doesn't come over under state corrections.
Okay.
So that would be a county by county release, but maybe David has more information on that.
I apologize for clarification. It's not that we can't put the data out, and the data does, obviously at the county level it's put out, and we do have some level of visibility to the Department of Corrections data at the state level as well. We have not ingested it into our EBI to be able to display it in our COVID-19 dashboards to narrow it down to say these are these are people that contracted COVID-19 in the Department of Corrections. It's just, it hasn't been a filter that we've ingested yet. So it is a goal. It's a good goal to have that data, but I just want to clarify, it's not that the data is not there. It's just not pulled into one centralized place yet.
Thank you.
I was just sort of free thinking some of this. And if you can imagine coming out of that governor's council that I sit on, the idea of being able to access Medicaid and whether or not you actually pick up Medicaid upon release from prison, and then being able to correlate that data to recidivism rates, you can just imagine the power of this data if it can be married. So it's really, really exciting stuff. I'm getting awfully close to living in Katie's world there. So are there any other questions for the team? This is great. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you very much, Senator Sherman and representatives. I appreciate the opportunity to come.
Thank you all so much.
In the interest of time, which is fleeting, do we have any, I kind of don't want to, while this is so fresh in our minds as a commission, Katie, do you have any thoughts about how, I'm very excited by this, and I'm just thinking, how do you think, having been with us all the way along, how do you think this we can be in sort of make this actionable?
Yeah, I pulled up just some of our original charges, and I do think that a key step for the commission is to come up with concrete recommendations, right? I know we want the whole world of environmental health at our fingertips, but I think what we heard is it still takes people power to model the data and make the visualizations. And so what is our short list then of, if we're going to put resources towards building something, what should that be? Should it be PFAS and health outcomes? Should it be arsenic and potential outcomes? Should it be children's health? I think the charge for us is to help prioritize the environmental health priorities, so that when the Shawship Council is meeting and discussing environmental health, what are the priorities then within an environmental health bucket? And then once we have a priority and a shared priority across agencies, a shared priority with the legislature, then we find the resources, like David said, to actually build it. But I think that's the charge of all the world of environmental health. What's most important to either drive policy or answer unanswered questions, where we want to have data to help us. So I think that is the challenge. And I think that's been our challenge since the beginning, is what are the priority topics to really put our resources towards?
I would say our challenge has evolved somewhat, because our challenge originally was that this kind of data access and being able to query data just didn't exist. We had the data, but as we all remember, it was really not something we could go and jump into and ask questions of it and come back with answers. So what I'm thinking, and please speak up, I'm thinking that maybe our next meeting is really, unless there's something else that you'd like to have on the agenda, that we really take what we've learned, take what we've got from our data subcommittee, take what we've got from our education subcommittee, and sort of have a more of a free thinking, where do we go from here with all of this session? And, an hour and a half of really trying to pull together our collective thoughts on next steps for this commission. Mindy, you have a question or some idea?
Because of the changeover, are we able to meet in subcommittees now? Or are we?
Subcommittees can
on Zoom?
meet.
Okay. We can't on House bills, so that's why, or we don't know a path yet on House bills.
Well, we can, Jenny's on, and we can check to see if subcommittees can meet. But actually, Shawship is meeting, but they're under DHHS, so they have a slightly more robust ability to do some of this.
Can I ask a dumb question? What's Shawship?
Oh, that's the State Health Assessment, State Health Improvement Plan Advisory Council, which was passed a year ago. and is developing the state health improvement plan, but it's an ongoing council. It doesn't have an out date, so it will be working on issues of public health, healthcare, statewide, long-term. But right now their charge is to develop this required state health improvement plan. And that's where the name comes from. And it's interesting because there's a lot of parallels, as you can tell, these different commissions that, and all of us who are in the legislature know about all these different commissions. I think Gary heads up the Commission on Tick-Borne Illness, and certainly there are. Oh, are you not on that anymore, Gary?
I got relieved.
Okay, that may be a relief. So in any case, these all have real implications, and also an awful lot of cross-pollination. So is that something that everybody would be in favor of for next meeting, is to regroup, take all the information we have? I would encourage going back over the last several meetings and pulling minutes and presentations, and then at our next meeting in February, which would be the third Friday in February, we would have a chance to sit down and really think about next steps for this commission.
I think Katie might be able to answer this. I don't off the top of my head remember, but I think we had a few recommendations for people besides EBI to come speak to us about a couple of things from our data group. So we kind of don't want to lose track of those too.
Right. Katie, do you remember what other groups?
I do. I was just trying to pull up our notes because I think that.
Maybe we should finish up.
I thought some of those were captured in there, but one in particular I know that we had talked about was the Birth Defects Registry as a specific example of a registry that had lost its funding but is pursuing new funding. And so I know we're all familiar with the Cancer Registry. It's sort of one more data set. And I think one that a lot of folks are interested in, as birth outcomes or birth defects may be relevant from an environmental health perspective. So one idea was to invite the Maternal Child Health Program to give a presentation on the Birth Defects Registry as an example of a registry that may be tracking and some outcomes of interest.
Nancy, I'm sorry. Nancy, did you have a?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know one of the other ones that we had mentioned that I don't think made it on our list was the interest in special education, the costs, and I think we weren't sure quite who would be able to present on that, but I think that would be that came up in our conversation today, and I think that would be helpful too.
So that might be Department of Ed. Is that where that would live? Do we know, Katie?
That is where that would be, and I think we heard David Wieters talking about, they're starting to engage with them around the preschool development grant. I know our lead program here at the health department is also interested, and so I think we're just having some conversations at the agency level around who the right people are. So I don't have a name or a contact. I think we're trying to do some of that relationship building.
Okay.
So I can follow up specifically, if we wanted to try to find someone to give that kind of presentation. But I think the question before us to Senator Sherman's point is, do we want to have more of those presentations, or do we need to do some of our own sort of visioning and prioritizing to know then which of these presentations fits best?
Thoughts? We could see if we could get the Birth Defects Registry for our next meeting. I'm not sure how we would track down special ed, but we could look at the Department of Education and then have our regroup in March, since those had been suggested out of the data committee.
I think that makes sense to gather up as much info as we can get and then regroup.
Okay.
Or as many of the ideas that we had about who to get it from.
All right. So Katie, would you mind working on the birth defects registry? And Jenny and I'll work on the special ed DOE. Does that sound okay, Jenny?
Sounds good to me, Senator.
Okay.
And do we have a meeting scheduled for February or is that our next item of business? Maybe where I can then ask the maternal child health program about
Right, that would be our last item of business. Everybody pull out their calendars. So February 19th, same time. Does that work for everybody?
Can you repeat that, Senator Sherman? Was it the 19th, 12 to 2?
19th, 12 to 2.
Works for me.
Yep.
Okay, so Jenny, let's put that in the calendar. And then we'll start working on presenters. Is there any reason to have, at this point, Katie, to have the cancer registry come back and talk to us, or are we up to date on them? Have they changed significantly? No.
But their data is being incorporated into the version 2 of the dashboard, right? The wisdom. So they're already in there. So there's no.
Okay. All right. So we'll work on those two Gary.
Just as a side thought, with what we've heard today, the ability to look at a lot more data, our wish list of what we would like to do has been greatly expanded. So, I mean, who we could have come present, I'm beginning to think, oh, that we can really get some more people in here.
Right.
So it's this is looking about who's going to present versus what we're going to do. It's a never-ending process.
No, I agree. And I think for Gary, you, me, and Bill, we have to think about this is a budget year, and some of what we heard, and this is going to be an incredibly tight budget year, and we haven't had much success trying to get more support to DHHS, but I think some of these, the IT work that they're doing right now is just, it's almost limitless in the ability for it to inform policy. So I hope in our respective constituencies we can support the department as they ask for this. And Katie, maybe you could just let the three of us know, and also Rep. Salloway, and then we could pass it along to Senator Bradley, although he may already be aware where in the budget some of the support for this IT work lies, so that we can specifically make sure that it's left intact.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I'll reach out to the presenters today. I do know that there is a IT piece, at least in the capital budget, so separate from program budgets, that there is some of this mentioned and tied up in the capital piece of the budget. So
great, Gary.
it's really infrastructure. So.
Yeah, just the business about the budget. I mean, it's very hard to put a firm number on it, but the ROI for good data certainly downstream makes for a lot of cost savings.
Yeah.
As evidenced by the pandemic.
Right. Bill, do you have any thoughts on that?
I would just like to see anything that we need prioritized. In other words, if we needed some more people, what things would you get if one person was hired, 2, 3? Because we may not go for the whole thing. What would the first priority be?
Yep. Good thought.
I think we need to do that.
And the same for topics too. I mean, the ROI for one area for, say, lead versus, something else would come into play as well.
Right. And that's where understanding some of the special ed data. And Katie, I don't know if there's much on behavioral neuro issues with the lead issues, that kind of thing. And I think, Mindy, is it correct that arsenic is becoming more and more concerning for neurotoxicity?
Yep.
So, the long-term costs of neurotoxicity from children, they're overwhelming.
And PFAS as well.
And PFAS as well. And, we're seeing, was it yesterday or the day before, the former governor of Michigan was just indicted for his role in the Flint water crisis. And I've met the pediatrician who unroofed all of that and brought it to national. I think Mindy has too. And the impact on their child development world for an entire generation is going to be enormous. So what Gary was saying about good data driving good policy and keeping and really having a real impact on the fiscal component is absolutely true.
And also, things like pediatric cancer that is so incredibly expensive to treat.
Yes. Yep.
And, the impacts are lifelong on that child that's happened.
So I
Well,
think
we've had an example we can fall back on, and that's the mercury episode from about 20 years ago. That had wide-ranging impact as well.
Right. All right. Well, this has been great. Thank you all so much. And thank you, Jenny, for being here. And so we will meet on that Friday in February, and we'll hopefully have those 2 presentations. And then March we will use as a regroup, where we take all of this that we've heard and try to come up with some real priorities that we can move forward on.